When you understand the criteria for autism, it's an awful lot easier for you to understand the areas of difficulty that your child is experiencing. Therefore, it becomes a little bit simpler to identify strategies and ways to support them when they're finding things difficult. My name is Conor McDonough from Keros Therapies. We complete autism assessments and we support children on the autism spectrum. So the DSM criteria looks at two main areas. Section A identifies three problem areas. They are difficulties with social interactions. So whether your child is able to share, do they have an interest in other children, do they interact with other children when they approach them, or do they offer comfort to other people when they're hurt or upset, amongst other areas. The second area is whether your child has difficulties with using non-verbal behaviours to communicate. Was it clear based on their facial expressions, how they're feeling, and do they use gestures to communicate, like nodding to indicate yes or shaking their head to indicate no, amongst other areas. We also look at whether your child has the ability to build and sustain relationships or friendships with other people. And section B looks at four main areas. So the first of these is stereotyped or unusual and repetitive play, speech, and motor movements. The second of these areas is where your child has difficulties with managing changes to the usual routines. So they prefer routines and they become anxious and worked up if these change. And the third of these areas is when your child has intense interests to the point where it impacts on other activities of daily living. And finally, we look at whether your child has sensory processing difficulties. So when they struggle with noise, bright lights, how clothes feel, taste, smell, and even motor coordination, amongst other areas. So when you put all these difficulties together, it tends to be that children will struggle with speech and language and communication. They will also struggle with sensory processing difficulties. And this has an impact on how we think and process information. So it can also mean, for example, that children are quite rigid or black and white in their thinking. These areas can often lead to high levels of anxiety, difficulties with managing emotions, and repetition. We will start to look at how you support your child to manage these difficulties and to thrive.